Allah is greater. But we don't all understand that truth and internalize and live that truth at the same level. And so those who live that truth at a higher level are able to respond differently to the experiences of their life. They experience life differently. Does that make sense? And so how Allahu Akbar plays out in our life is in every aspect. And I just gave the example of anxiety and fear. Fear of loss. See, because the fear of loss is actually what tortures us. It's the fear of loss that tortures us, even before the loss. Do you know this? And there's a lot of neuroscience to this, by the way. There's a lot of research to show this. That we actually get into thinking patterns that are very dysfunctional. Whereas we put our body through trauma, even if the trauma isn't happening. And this is just through our thinking. I'll give you an example. Some of us, and this is, by the way, wired very early in childhood. Some of us, we sort of like practice, or we sort of go through like a dress rehearsal for tragedy. We practice tragedy in our minds. We play the whole thing out. We are the characters in the play. Other people in our life, they play a part. And the whole thing gets practiced in our minds. So it's like a dress rehearsal. It is a entire like reenactment. And guess what happens when we do that? Your body does not know the difference between imagining the tragedy and it happening. This information should be revolutionary for us, transformative for us. Because when we allow our minds, and a lot of this, shaitan plays with us too. But when we allow our minds to play out tragedies and all of our fears and all of these scenarios that we fear, we are actually stressing our body. Because we're telling our body that these things are happening. You're like telling your nervous system, there's a lion in the house. When in fact, you're just sitting on the couch thinking. And you're completely safe, but your body doesn't know the difference. This is one example that we actually have so much influence over our own state. We have a lot of influence over our own state. And so much of it comes from how we think. When we start to go down that road, because I'm going to repeat this, a lot of these patterns are wired in childhood. These are wired in childhood. And the reason why they are wired that way is because they were necessary for us to stay safe in childhood. It was necessary for us to play out what could happen in an attempt to protect ourselves. And so it became hardwired in our nervous system that this is how we live our lives. We play out every bad scenario that can happen, every bad outcome, in hopes that we can control the outcome. I'll tell you, if you find a person who is very controlling, I will tell you that that is a person who is afraid of feeling their own emotions. It is a person who's actually very uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. It's a person who's actually quite avoidant of emotion. A person who doesn't like to feel their feelings. And so in an attempt to avoid feeling their feelings, they think if I can only control every aspect, I can control the outcome, and then I never have to feel bad. I never have to feel discomfort. I never have to feel disappointment. I don't have to feel vulnerable. A person who is very controlling is also very, very afraid of vulnerability. Vulnerability is the feeling of disappointment, the feeling of sadness, the feeling of well, anxiety actually, I'll tell you, anxiety is very interesting. Anxiety is actually the opposite of vulnerability in a sense, and I'll explain why. In fact, oftentimes, like, suppressed anger will show up as anxiety.
Is that started in early childhood?
Absolutely. All of this started in early childhood. All of this did. And that's why if we really want to talk about, so there's two trajectories here. There's two paths. One is the discussion of healing. One is the discussion of rewiring, right? But then there's another trajectory and there's another discussion, and that is of parenting, so that we can do it differently, right? And right now I'm going to talk about the healing side, but there's another totally different path, which is, I think, equally and if not more important, which is how can we start to do it differently for our children, right? So that they can have the best chance to be healthy in their spiritual life, but also in their mental health. Okay. But when we're talking about control, So a person who is very afraid of feeling uncomfortable, that's vulnerability. The feeling of discomfort, that means that you're vulnerable in those moments. You don't want to have to cry. You don't like to cry. You don't like that feeling. It feels like weakness to you. It feels like weakness to you to cry. It feels like weakness to you to have to be disappointed, to feel like let down, to feel uncomfortable. And so what happens is, as a protective measure, you think, I'm going to control the situation so that I don't have to feel my feelings, so that I don't have to feel bad. I don't have to be weak. And I think that strength comes from control. And I can tell you right now that is an absolute illusion. It's a myth. Because trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings is going to actually cause you more harm. The avoidance, I'll tell you, so the avoidance makes it worse. And what you will find is that you will be in constant anxiety. Anxiety is an interesting sort of state. Anxiety is not a normal state. Now, fear is normal once in a while. Fear. Now, I want you to understand there's a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is, I am afraid of this intruder who's just broken into my house. That's very normal. If you were not afraid, something's wrong with you. Okay? Something is wrong. I am afraid of my child crossing the street by themselves. Normal. Okay? So fear has a specific thing that you're afraid of. And it is very normal. And fear comes as a protective measure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the way, few fundamental concepts here. Every emotion that Allah created was created with a purpose. There's no mistakes. Allah didn't make a mistake with fear. Allah didn't make a mistake with anger. Allah didn't make a mistake with sadness. Allah did not make mistakes. So they all serve a purpose. But there is a difference between fear and anxiety. And I'll give you an example of the roots of this, because you asked about childhood. So, as a child, let's go back to the origin of our anxiety. As a child, when we feel threatened, it is natural to feel fear, right? So you feel a threat. The child is alone, the child feels fear. The child hears thunder, the child feels fear. So the child sees, maybe like a scary dog, the child feels fear. So that fear is normal. Now, when the child feels that fear, the child then is programmed to look for safety. Where? In the parent, right? The caretaker. So starting from infancy, if the child feels threatened, the child is hungry. I'm talking like a newborn. The child is hungry. The child is gonna do what the child is supposed to do, which is cry, right? The child is now calling out to the parent, looking for safety. Now, what happens when safety doesn't come? What happens when? That's how it comes. So fear is supposed to lead to, calling out for safety, looking for safety. And then if safety comes, the fear is gone. Happens again. Oh, I'm afraid. There's a dog. Calling out. Then safety comes. Fear is gone. Right? You've picked up the child. You've comforted the child. You've made the child feel safe. But now what happens when the child feels fear, calls out, and is not responded to? Then the child feels fear, calls out, and is not responded to. The child feels fear, calls out, and is not responded to. Any type of threat, and they are asking for safety but not finding safety, then the child learns it's not just one thing that is not safe and I can find safety. The entire world is unsafe. And this is how fear turns to anxiety. Anxiety is a generalized feeling that the world is not safe. It's not just that dog is not safe, but my mom is going to keep me safe. It's not just the thunder is not safe in the moment, but I have my safe place. It is a person who did not have a safe place. They did not have a safe place. And so they learned that there is no safe place and the world is not safe. And that is what we call anxiety. There is no safety. And therefore, we look for ways to find safety. How? Well, by controlling everything. By trying to control everything. I'm going to control the outcome. I'm going to control what this person does. I'm going to control how my kids do this. I'm going to control how my husband or my wife does this. I'm going to control. And the control, that effort to control is really just an effort to find safety. Safety that you learned early on really doesn't exist in this world. And so, how do I heal that? How do I heal that? On one level, one of the most powerful antidotes to this phenomenon is Allahu Akbar. Do you understand? Because you are a person who had to learn that there isn't safety. You know what? Safety isn't coming. Safety isn't coming. I'm on my own. I'm on my own. I'm on my own in my pain. I am on my own in my sadness. I'm on my own. See, if you think about in childhood, you take an example of a child who's bullied, a child who's abused. And that child does not have a safe place to go with that pain. That child does not have a safe place to take that pain. And so that child learns, I'm on my own in my pain. I got to deal with it on my own. So many people have experienced terrible things in childhood. and literally have told no one. Sometimes I'm the first person they've told. They couldn't go to their own parent. Or some of them went to a parent and the parent was like, well, it's your fault. Or keep your mouth shut, because that's a relative, usually. This is where, you want to understand where anxiety came from. That's where it came from. It didn't come today. It didn't come last year, right? It's not like, you didn't take enough supplements. You know what I'm saying? You're deficient in vitamin C. That's not where it came from. It came from when you were a kid. And there wasn't safety in the times when you felt threatened, when you felt sad, when you felt scared, when you felt humiliated. And so now, fast forward, we're adults now, but that wiring is still there. That programming is still there. And so on the one hand, we have to reprogram. And this is something very possible, by the way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the mind with something called neuroplasticity, which means that the wiring of the nervous system can be rewired. It's moldable. And so basically, the more you practice certain thinking patterns, the more you're building the wiring for that. So it's like hard wiring. Your brain actually has hard wiring. They say that the pathways that fire together, they will actually wire together. So there's actual like hard wiring in the brain. And the more you practice certain thinking patterns, the more you're building the infrastructure in the brain for that. Things like gratitude. The practice of gratitude changes the brain. Okay. The things like not playing out scenarios of tragedy, not practicing how terrible this thing can play out. And actually kind of going through an entire dress rehearsal of it. These things can absolutely change your brain. But ultimately, how powerful is Allahu Akbar? That when I am afraid, because I learned early on that there isn't safety. The ones who were supposed to keep me safe emotionally and physically and everything didn't do their job properly. They didn't keep me safe. There wasn't safety for my emotions. If I came with an emotion, stop crying. It's not a big deal. You're too sensitive. If I showed anger, and this is a big one, especially for women, especially for little girls, is that when a little girl shows anger, especially girls, boys are kind of given more leeway to show anger. But when a little girl shows anger, and I'm not talking about like burning the house down stuff, I'm talking about like normal human emotion, anger. When we are wronged, when we are harmed, when there is injustice, we are supposed to feel anger. This is a design of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do you think that is? Because anger is a motivator. That's why. Anger motivates action. If I see injustice and I don't feel anything, I'm not motivated to do anything. Right? If I see the injustice happening and I don't feel anything, I don't care, I'm numb to it, then I'm not motivated to take any action. And so anger has its place. Now the problem is when anger is not controlled, when there isn't a regulation of the emotion. And so what I'm discussing right now is emotional health involves emotional regulation. But emotional regulation does not mean emotional suppression. Suppression is not regulation. Suppression is not regulation. You're not regulating your anger because you're just suppressing it. That's like saying that I'm going to digest my food by just letting it sit in my stomach and my intestines. It's not going to get digested. I'm not processing anything, and I'm going to get sick. And so most of us were taught to suppress our emotions, especially specific ones. And in the case of anger, you know, usually if a little girl is showing anger, it's like she will be rejected for that. She will be shamed for that. She will be taught very quickly that you're not allowed to do that. You have to keep everybody happy. You have to please everyone else. And you have to keep everyone else appeased. So you better swallow your own anger and swallow your own feelings and your own needs in order to appease everyone else. Your job, especially as a little girl,